On Sunday evening, June the 5th, 1983, 15-year-old Richard Kelvin was abducted from Ward Street, North Adelaide, not more than 50 metres from his home, by Adelaide serial killer Bevan Spencer Von Einem. I'm going to retrace Richard Kelvin's final steps from where, on that Sunday evening, he went to the bus stop on O'Connell Street, which runs just off Ward Street, where he lived, to see off his friend Carl Brooks to the bus. After seeing his friend off at the bus, this is approximately a little after 6 p.m, he then left the bus stop and began returning home down Ward Street toward his home, where at some point he was abducted. I will now trace Richard Kelvin's final steps from the O'Connell Street bus stop to the approximate site of his abduction. We are on O'Connell Street, North Adelaide, at the approximate location of the bus stop where Richard Kelvin was standing on the night of Sunday, June 5th, 1983. It's in about this location here, where the bus stop was. Richard Kelvin waited here for the bus to arrive. The bus arrived, of course. His mate Carl Brooks got on. Then Richard Kelvin began to walk home, which was no more than 100 to 200 metres from his home. So we'll follow that, what we believe is his final path home. So this is the bus stop on O'Connell Street. We are walking now south down O'Connell Street. Now we believe he turned into this side street, which is Marion Street. It is believed he came down this side street, Marion Street. There's another way to travel down to his home in Ward Street, and that's via O'Connell Street. But it does appear as if he came this way. Two young men who saw Richard Kelvin get off the bus, who got off the bus and saw Richard Kelvin briefly, they said they saw him jogging down this side street, Marion Street, which we will turn right in a moment up ahead, which will then turn into Bolton Street, which leads to Ward Street, where Richard Kelvin lived and was the site of his abduction. So we're coming down Marion Street in a easterly direction. Now here at the corner we're going to turn into Bolton Street. So that is Marion Street, which runs off O'Connell Street. O'Connell Street is down there. Richard Kelvin walked the length of this Marion Street and then turned into Bolton Street. Now walking in a southerly direction, City of Adelaide straight ahead. That is Ward Street up ahead. See, we're on Bolton Street. So we came to, we're now at the corner of Bolton and Ward Street. We're on the corner of Bolton Street. I think now this is Ward Street we're on right here, facing that's a easterly direction. So this is Ward Street. Richard Kelvin lived, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think on the right hand side of this road, further up there. So that's Bolton Street. He came out of Bolton Street. We'll assume he came down this part of the northern side of Ward Street on the footpath here and continued walking or jogging, whatever he was doing, in a easterly direction up Ward Street. His home no more than 100 or so metres from here. Now we're getting to the point where we think Richard Kelvin was abducted. Again, the precise location isn't known, obviously, but police seem to think he was abducted near the corner of Margaret Street and Ward Street, which is right up here. So he would have been walking down this footpath. As I said, I think he lived on the right hand side of this road, on the southern side of Ward Street, which means he would have at some point had to have crossed over. Now we are here at the corner. This is the intersection of Ward Street and Margaret Street, and it is believed in this location that Richard Kelvin was abducted. A car containing Bevan Spencer Von Einem and several accomplices must have followed him from O'Connell Street, and this was a Sunday evening, early Sunday evening, a bit after 6 p.m. It would have been dark at that time. They pulled up around here somewhere and at some point dragged him into the car. Several people living in this vicinity heard the abduction, cries for help. They heard several individuals. Richard Kelvin sustained a serious head injury early in his captivity, which would indicate that was inflicted when he was abducted that night right here and dragged into the car. Obviously they struck him on the head with something to most likely render him unconscious. We'll keep walking a bit up toward Margaret Street here and get another perspective of several of the ear witnesses heard the abduction were living in Margaret Street. But as I said, this is an approximate location. This is Margaret Street that runs into Ward Street. This is the corner of Ward Street and Margaret Street. We'll have a look back down Ward Street facing west. That is O'Connell Street, where that car is turned into. This is Ward Street. As I said, somewhere in this vicinity, Richard Kelvin most likely lived in houses along there. Again, I can't state that for a fact, but it is believed, I do believe Richard Kelvin lived in houses somewhere around there, and he was most likely abducted. We'll go over to the southern side of Ward Street and get another angle of the intersection. Yeah, so somewhere in this vicinity it is believed Richard Kelvin was abducted. Most likely in the area where you're looking at right now, again approximately. Richard Kelvin's body was found 7 weeks after his abduction on Sunday afternoon, July 24th, 1983 in the Adelaide Hills. He'd been held captive for 5 weeks before being murdered. In November 1983, police arrested Bevan Spencer Von Einem, a 37-year-old accountant, and in November 1984 he was charged with he was convicted of the murder of Richard Kelvin and imprisoned for life, where he remains to this day. Obviously, for the abduction of Richard Kelvin there were others involved, but no one has ever faced any other charges over Richard Kelvin's murder. But Von Einem obviously is also responsible for 4 other murders in Adelaide between 1979 and 1983. But he's only ever been convicted of the Richard Kelvin murder. So this is where it happened. This is the site of the Richard Kelvin abduction, Ward Street, North Adelaide, where it happened on Sunday evening, June 5th, 1983.